My best friend tried to hijack my $15 million company using a contract scribbled on a bar napkin, but he didn't realize I'd buried a digital time bomb in the code. He thinks he's walking away with millions. But I'm about to show him what happens when you betray the man who holds the keys. I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these stories. You see them all over the internet. The "I built $1 million company and my lazy friend wants a cut" tropes. You always think, how could anyone be that delusional? Well, I found out the hard way that when money starts flowing like a river, people you once trusted will grow gills and try to swim in it, even if they didn't help you dig the trench. My name is Elias. 3 years ago, I was working out of a cramped studio apartment that smelled perpetually of burnt coffee and ozone from my overheating servers. I was developing a niche software-as-a-service SaaS platform called Logilink. The premise was simple but effective. It used a proprietary algorithm to optimize mid-level supply chains for independent manufacturers. At the time, the big players only cared about the giants like Amazon or Walmart. The little guys were getting crushed by shipping costs, and I saw a way to save them millions. In the beginning, it was just me. I was the coder, the salesman, the janitor, and the customer support. But as the beta tests started showing a 30% increase in efficiency from my first 3 clients, I realized I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone to handle the administrative side, onboarding clients, managing the basic paperwork, and keeping the schedule tight while I focused on the heavy-duty back-end development. Enter Julian. Julian was a guy I'd known since college. He was charming, well-spoken, and always seemed to have a business mind, or so he claimed. At the time, he'd just been let go from a mid-level management position at a dying retail chain. He was broke, desperate, and, quite frankly, a friend. I decided to give him a shot. I told him, "Julian, I can't pay you a corporate salary yet. I can give you a modest monthly stipend and a title, Operations Manager. If we grow, you grow, but you have to be in the trenches with me." He looked me in the eye, shook my hand, and said, "Elias, I'm your man. Let's build an empire." The first 6 months were the honeymoon phase, which is to say, they were the only months where Julian actually pretended to work. As soon as the initial excitement wore off and the actual grunt work began, his true colors started bleeding through. The turning point came during the Great Pivot. About 8 months in, I realized that the logistics market was shifting. To survive, Logilink needed to integrate real-time AI tracking, a massive undertaking that required me to rewrite nearly 40% of the core code. This meant we needed to migrate our existing clients to a new interface. It was a tedious manual process that required constant communication and data entry. I sat Julian down and laid out the plan. I'm going to be heads down coding for the next 16 hours a day. I need you to handle the client migration. It's about 40 accounts. You need to call them, walk them through the new portal, and manually verify their inventory data. It's boring, but if we don't do this, the system crashes in a month. Julian leaned back in his chair, tapping a gold pen he'd bought with his first stipend check. "Elias, I'm a strategist. Calling small fry manufacturers to talk about inventory spreadsheets? That's data entry. That's beneath the role of an operations manager. We should hire an intern for that." "With what money, Julian?" I asked, my voice tight. "We're pre-revenue on the new build. We are the interns. I'm literally sleeping under my desk so I can finish the API integrations. I need you to do this." He gave me a condescending smile. "I'll look into automating it," he said. He didn't. He spent the next 2 weeks networking at local tech mixers, drinking expensive cocktails on the company's meager travel budget. Well, I stayed up until 4 a.m. every night doing his job and mine. Whenever I confronted him, he'd give me the same line. I'm focused on the big picture, Elias. You're too stuck in the weeds. I'm building the brand. The brand was non-existent because the product was barely holding together. The final straw regarding his cooperation came when we landed our first major contract, a regional furniture conglomerate. This was the make or break moment. They wanted a live demonstration of the new AI module. I told Julian, I need you to prep the data sets for the demo. I've written the scripts. You just need to input their specific SKU list so the AI has something to process. It'll take you 5 hours, tops. The day of the demo arrived. I walked into our small shared office, exhausted and buzzing on caffeine, to find Julian wasn't there. He sent a text. Caught a lead for a potential VC investor in the city. Meeting him for lunch. You've got the demo covered, right? You're the tech guy anyway. Go get him, Tiger. I had to scramble, sweating through my shirt, inputting the data sets 10 minutes before the presentation began. I did the demo alone. I closed the deal alone. That contract was worth $250,000 in annual recurring revenue. It was the moment LogiLink went from a project to a venture. When Julian returned that evening, smelling of steak and expensive red wine, he had the audacity to clap me on the back. I heard the news. We did it, partner. I told you that networking would pay off. The guy I met today is very interested in our trajectory. He's interested in the trajectory I built while you were eating ribeye? I snapped. Don't be like that, Julian laughed. It's a team effort. You do the gears, I do the grease. Over the next year, LogiLink exploded. I stopped asking Julian to do things because it was easier to just hire actual employees who would follow instructions. I kept Julian on a ghost salary, mostly out of a misplaced sense of loyalty and a hope that he'd eventually find a niche where he was useful. He became the Senior Vice President of Global Strategy, a title he gave himself on LinkedIn while his actual daily output consisted of checking his fantasy football league and taking 3-hour lunches. Then the big fish arrived. A multi-billion-dollar global tech firm, Aegis System, always sent an inquiry. They weren't just looking to partner, they were looking to acquire. The preliminary offer was staggering. It was enough money to change my life, my parents' lives, and the lives of every employee who had actually put in the work. I kept the negotiations quiet. I wanted everything finalized before I made an announcement. I spent months in grueling due diligence, proving every line of code was mine, every contract was valid, and every cent was accounted for. Finally, the day came. The letter of intent was signed. The acquisition price was set at $15 million. I called a company-wide meeting at a high-end restaurant to celebrate. I was ready to hand out bonuses that would make my lead developers weep with joy. Julian showed up in a custom-tailored suit, looking like he'd personally invented the internet. As I stood up to make the announcement, the room went silent. I spoke about the journey, the late nights, and the incredible effort the team had put in. I announced the acquisition by Aegis. The room erupted in cheers. People were hugging, crying, and toasting. Julian leaned over to me, his eyes gleaming with a predatory sort of hunger. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't say, I'm proud of you. He leaned in close, his voice a low, confident whisper that chilled the champagne in my hand. So, Elias, he said, swirling his glass, since I've been here since day one as your partner, I've already done the math. My 40% stake should be about $6 million, right? I'll expect the transfer paperwork on my desk by Monday. I looked at him, stunned. He didn't have a 40% stake. He didn't even have a 1% stake. He was an at-will employee who had refused every task I'd ever given him. "Julian," I said, my voice steady but cold, "you don't own any equity in this company. You're an employee." The smile didn't leave his face, but his eyes turned into chips of ice. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a napkin from a bar we'd visited 3 years ago during the first week I'd hired him. "Is that so?" Julian whispered, unfolding the napkin to reveal a drunken scrawl in my own handwriting. "Because this memorandum of understanding we signed over drinks says otherwise, and if you don't pay up, I'm going to make sure this acquisition becomes a legal nightmare that Aegis won't touch with a 10-foot pole." I stared at that napkin as if it were a venomous spider crawling toward my throat. The ink was faded, a smudged blue ballpoint scrawl on a piece of cheap, porous paper. "Elias and Julian, partners, 60-40 split. LogiLink is ours." Below it, my signature, a sloppy, jagged version of my name from a night 3 years ago when I had been 3 IPAs deep in celebrating the fact that I'd finally cracked the first line of the logistics algorithm. "This isn't a contract, Julian," I hissed, my voice trembling with a cocktail of rage and sheer disbelief. "This was a toast. We were celebrating a breakthrough, and I was being a good friend. You haven't done 40% of the work. You haven't done 4% of the work. You've spent the last 3 years coasting on my payroll while I built this from nothing." Julian didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, the expensive leather creaking under his weight. He looked around the high-end restaurant, at the staff I'd hired and the champagne I'd paid for, with the smug expression of a king surveying his kingdom. "The law is a funny thing, Elias," he said, his tone conversational, almost pitying. "Intent is what matters. You wrote it. You signed it. And for 3 years, I've held the title of Operations Manager. I've been the face of the company at every mixer and networking event while you were hiding in your dark little hole. To the outside world, I am the partner. And Aegis, they don't like messy. They like clean, undisputed ownership. If I file a dynamic injunction tomorrow morning, this whole $15 million deal freezes. It could take years to settle in court. By then, LogiLink will be obsolete and Aegis will have moved on to your competitors." He took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine. "So you can give me my $6 million and we part as friends, or we can both watch this ship sink. Difference is, I've got nothing to lose. You're the one who put your soul into this. How much is your soul worth to you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I walked out of the restaurant, leaving the celebration behind. The cold night air hit me, but it did nothing to cool the fire in my chest. The next morning, I was in my lawyer Sarah's office before she'd even poured her first coffee. I laid the situation out, my words tumbling over each other. I showed her the photo I'd snapped of the napkin. Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "Elias? In a vacuum? This napkin is garbage. It's not notarized, there's no consideration clause, and you could argue diminished capacity if you were drinking. But Julian is right about one thing, the timing. Aegis has a clouded title clause. If there is any active litigation regarding the ownership of the intellectual property or the company's shares, they have the right to terminate the acquisition immediately without penalty. So he's holding me hostage," I said, pacing the length of her office. "He's leveraging the deal," Sarah corrected. "He knows you're at the finish line. He's betting that you'd rather have $9 million than 0 and a 5-year legal battle that you might win, but will definitely bankrupt you in the process." "I can't give him that money, Sarah. It's not about the cash. It's the principle. He sat there and watched me work 20-hour days. He saw me skip my sister's wedding because we had a server crash. He did nothing. Then we fight," she said. "But be prepared. He's already started." She turned her computer monitor toward me. Julian had already filed a notice of interest with the state's business bureau. He'd also sent a formal cease and desist to our headquarters, claiming that any move to sell the company without his express written consent was a violation of fiduciary duty. But Julian wasn't finished with his strategy. By noon, the office was in a state of quiet panic. Julian had sent a BCC'd email to the entire staff, the developers, the sales team, the support crew. In it, he painted himself as the silent founder who was being pushed out by a greedy CEO who wanted to keep the acquisition money for himself. He claimed that he had been fighting for larger bonuses for the staff, and that my refusal to recognize his partnership was the only thing holding up their payouts. It was a brilliant, disgusting move. He was turning my own team against me, poisoning the well so that if I didn't give in, I'd be the villain in the eyes of the people I'd worked alongside for years. I walked into the office to find my lead developer, Marcus, standing by the coffee machine. Marcus had been with me for 2 years. He was the one who had stayed up with me during the furniture conglomerate demo. "Is it true, Elias?" Marcus asked, his voice low. "Did Julian help start this? He says he's the reason we got the initial seed funding connections." "Julian didn't get us a dime, Marcus. He took lunches. I took loans." Marcus looked down at his shoes. "He showed us the napkin, man. He's got it in a plastic sleeve. It looks official enough. The guys are talking. They're worried the deal is going to fall through because you won't settle with him. They've got mortgages, Elias. That bonus money is life-changing for us." The pressure was mounting from every side. My phone was blowing up with alerts. Then the call I dreaded most came through. It was Mark, the lead negotiator from Aegis Systems. "Elias," Mark said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "My legal team just flagged a filing from a Julian Vane. They also received an anonymous tip, though I suspect it's from Mr. Vane himself, suggesting that the core algorithm of Logalink was developed during a period where he was an active partner. We are pausing the due diligence process, effective immediately." "Mark, listen to me. It's a shakedown. He's an employee who's disgruntled." "I don't care what he is," Mark snapped. "We don't buy lawsuits. You have 72 hours to clear this up. If the notice of interest isn't withdrawn by Friday at 5 p.m., we're pulling the offer and moving to our second choice. There are other logistics startups, Elias. Don't make us go to one of them." I hung up, my hands shaking. I had 3 days to get a delusional, greedy parasite to back down, or I'd lose everything I'd spent my life building. I went to Julian's office. He was sitting there, feet up on the desk, playing a game on his phone. He didn't even look up when I slammed the door. 72 hours, Julian, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Aegis is going to walk. If they walk, there is no $15 million. There is no $6 million for you. There's just a bankrupt company and a lot of very angry people. Julian finally looked up, a cold, predatory light in his eyes. "Then I guess you better start signing those transfer papers, partner. I've already got the wire instructions ready." "I'm not giving you 40%, I said. "I'll offer you a severance, a generous one, $500,000. Take it and disappear." Julian laughed. It was a harsh, mocking sound. 500 grand? That's an insult. I want my 40%. And because you've been so difficult, I've decided I want something else, too. I want a seat on the transition board. I want to be the one who hands the keys to Aegis. I want the credit, Elias. All of it. He stood up, walking toward me until we were inches apart. "You think you're the hero of this story? You're just the engine, I'm the driver, and without me, this car doesn't go anywhere but the scrap heap." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that there was no reasoning with him. He was willing to burn the whole world down just to prove he was a big man. I turned to leave, but as my hand touched the doorknob, I remembered something. A small nagging detail from a year ago, a day when Julian had thought I was out of the office, but I'd come back early because I'd forgotten my charger. I didn't say a word. I went straight to the server room. I locked the door and sat down at my terminal. If Julian wanted to play dirty, if he wanted to use intent and partnership as his weapons, then he'd forgotten one very important thing. I was the one who built the system. I knew every digital footprint ever left on our network. I began digging into the archived logs from the period Julian claimed he was strategizing our growth. I wasn't looking for what he had done. I was looking for what he'd done while he thought no one was watching. 4 hours later, I found it. It wasn't just laziness. It was something much, much worse. Something that wouldn't just lose him his 40%, but could land him in a federal prison. My heart raced as I downloaded the encrypted files. I had him. I finally had the leverage to end this. But as the progress bar hit 99%, the lights in the server room flickered and died. The hum of the cooling fans cut to a terrifying silence. My screen went black. A second later, the heavy steel door of the server room creaked open. A silhouette stood in the frame, holding a heavy industrial fire extinguisher. "I told you, Elias." Julian's voice drifted through the darkness, sounding disturbingly calm. "I'm the driver, and I'm not letting you take us off the road." Then he swung. The heavy canister whistled through the air, narrowly missing my temple and slamming into the server rack with a bone-jarring crunch. Sparks showered the dark room, illuminating Julian's face for a fraction of a second. He didn't look like the suave, wine-sipping strategist anymore. His eyes were wide, his tie was loosened, and his face was twisted into a mask of pure, desperate animalism. I didn't stay to see if he'd swing again. I lunged low, tackling him around the waist. We hit the floor hard, sliding across the anti-static mats. I'm not a fighter. I'm a guy who spends his life behind a keyboard, but adrenaline is a hell of a drug. I scrambled over him, my hand catching the edge of the server desk, and I hauled myself toward the door. "You think you can just delete me?" Julian screamed, his voice cracking. "I'm the foundation of this company. You're nothing without my face on the letterhead." I burst out of the server room and into the main office. It was late, but a few of the night shift developers were still there, staring at me in shock. I didn't stop. I ran to my office, grabbed my laptop and the encrypted external drive I'd just finished loading, and bolted for the elevators. I didn't breathe until I was in my car, the locks clicking shut. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the drive sitting in my passenger seat. What I'd found in those logs was worse than I'd imagined. Julian hadn't just been lazy. He'd been a saboteur. For the last 18 months, Julian had been operating a shadow consultancy. Using Logalink's internal lead database, the one I'd built and he'd refused to manage, he'd been reaching out to our prospective clients. But he wasn't selling them Logilink. He was selling them strategic advice on how to negotiate against us, or worse, he was funneling our proprietary shipping data to our biggest competitor, Nexus Dynamics, in exchange for referral fees paid to a shell company he'd set up. He'd been actively trying to suppress our valuation for over a year, likely so he could swoop in, claim a partnership, and then sell his portion of the distressed asset to the very people he'd been feeding. But then Aegis came along with an offer so high even his sabotage couldn't kill it. Now he was trying to pivot and grab the lion's share of the payout before I discovered he'd been gutting the company from the inside out. I drove to a 24-hour diner 3 towns over, somewhere I knew I wouldn't be followed. I opened my laptop and began connecting the dots. The evidence was there. IP logs showing him accessing the server at 3 a.m. from his home address, emails to Nexus Dynamics, and bank wire transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands that shared a name with his consultancy firm. But as I began to compile the kill file to send to Sarah and Aegis, I hit a massive wall. Julian hadn't been working alone. To hide his tracks within the code, he needed more than just operations access. He needed back-end permissions. Someone had granted him a ghost admin account. My stomach turned as I looked at the logs. The account hadn't been created by Julian. It had been created by Marcus. Marcus, my lead developer, my right-hand man, the guy who had looked me in the eye today and asked if Julian was a silent founder. I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. If Marcus was in on it, my entire infrastructure was compromised. I didn't know what was real anymore. Was the code even mine? Had they planted a backdoor to steal the AI algorithm the moment the Aegis deal closed? My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Marcus. "Elias, where are you? Julian just called security. He's telling everyone you attacked him in the server room and tried to destroy company property. He's calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning to have you removed as CEO for mental instability. You need to come back and explain this." I stared at the screen. Julian was using the crazy founder trope. It was a classic move. If you can't beat the guy, make the investors and employees think he's lost his mind. With Marcus backing him up, who would the board believe? The guy who sleeps under his desk and looks like a caffeinated wreck? Or the 2 sane professionals who claim the CEO is having a breakdown? I had 48 hours left before Aegis walked. If I went to the board meeting, I'd be walking into a trap. If I stayed away, I'd look guilty. I called Sarah, my lawyer. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Elias, it's 2 a.m. This better be a fire." "It's an inferno, Sarah. Julian is trying to oust me. He's got Marcus on his side. I have proof of corporate espionage, but I don't know if I can use it without blowing up the Aegis deal myself. If Aegis sees that their lead developer and operations manager were selling data to a competitor, they'll run for the hills." "Hold on," Sarah said, suddenly sharp. "Don't send anything yet. If you reveal the espionage now, you're admitting the company's IP is compromised. Aegis will sue you for non-disclosure during due diligence. You're in a legal pincer movement, Elias. Julian knows you can't expose him without killing the golden goose." "So what do I do?" I whispered. "You need to find a way to make Julian drop the claim voluntarily. You need leverage that doesn't involve the company's tech. Find something personal. Find the money, Elias. Follow the referral fees." I spent the rest of the night digging. I didn't look at the code. I looked at Julian. I went through his social media, his public filings, and his past employment records. I found something curious. Julian hadn't been let go from his previous job for downsizing. He'd been fired for unethical conduct, but the details were sealed behind a non-disclosure agreement. I reached out to an old contact at his former firm. By 9 a.m., I had the truth. Julian hadn't just been a bad employee. He was a serial predator of startups. He'd done this twice before, finding a brilliant but socially awkward founder, inserting himself as the business face, and then suing for a partner's share right before an exit. But there was a catch. In both previous cases, the companies had folded because the founders couldn't handle the stress. He hadn't just wanted the money, he'd wanted to destroy them. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for my company. I was stopping a professional parasite. I messaged Julian. "I'm coming to the board meeting at 10 a.m. I have what you want. Let's talk before we go in." He replied instantly. "Smart move, partner. I'll meet you in the lobby. Leave the laptop in the car." I didn't leave the laptop in the car. I walked into the lobby of our office building at 9:55 a.m. The air was thick with tension. I saw Julian standing near the elevators, looking impeccable in a slate gray suit. Marcus was standing next to him, looking incredibly uncomfortable. Julian smiled that same condescending, "I've already won" smile. "Glad you could join us, Elias. You look tired. Maybe after we sign the restructuring agreement, you can finally take that vacation you keep talking about." "I'm not signing anything, Julian," I said, loud enough for the lobby security and the receptionist to hear. "In fact, I think Marcus has something he wants to tell you." I turned to Marcus. Marcus looked at me, then at Julian, his face pale. I can't do it, Julian," Marcus stammered. Julian's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "We have a plan, Marcus. Stick to the script." "The script changed," I said, stepping closer. "I looked at the Ghost admin logs, Julian. I saw what you were doing. But more importantly, I found out who Marcus was actually talking to for the last 6 months. Julian laughed nervously. "He was talking to me. We were managing the transition." "No," I said, pulling a single sheet of paper from my pocket. "He was talking to the FBI's Cyber Crimes Division. I didn't have to find the evidence, Julian. I just had to give Marcus the courage to hand over the wiretaps he's been wearing since you first approached him to help you steal the code." Julian's face went from pale to a sickly, mottled gray. He looked at Marcus, his hands beginning to shake. You little rat. You're lying. Elias is bluffing." "I'm not," Marcus whispered. "They're upstairs, Julian, in the boardroom." The color drained from Julian's lips. He looked toward the elevators, then toward the glass front doors. For a second, I thought he was going to bolt. But then he did something I didn't expect. He started to laugh. A low, bubbling sound that grew into a full-blown cackle. "The FBI," Julian gasped, wiping a tear from his eye. "You think the FBI cares about a $15 million tech deal? You're so naive, Elias. You really are just a code monkey." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He turned the screen toward me. It was an outgoing call. To Mark, the lead negotiator at Aegis. "Hey, Mark," Julian said into the speaker, his voice suddenly smooth and professional. "Yeah, I'm here with Elias. Listen, we've had a change of heart. We've decided to reject the Aegis offer. We found a much better suitor, Nexus Dynamics. They've offered us $20 million, and they don't care about clouded titles. Because I've already signed the IP transfer as the authorized operations partner." My heart stopped. "You can't do that," I screamed. "I'm the majority shareholder." "Not according to the paperwork I filed with the state last night while you were hiding in a diner," Julian grinned. "I didn't just claim 40%, Elias. I filed a resignation of interest on your behalf using the digital signature you gave me access to for administrative purposes 3 years ago. As of 4 a.m., I am the sole director of LogiLink." He looked at the elevator doors, which dinged open. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, but they weren't FBI. I recognized them. They were the executive VPs from Nexus Dynamics. Julian leaned in, his breath smelling of peppermint and malice. "You're not the CEO anymore, Elias. You're just a trespasser. Security? Please escort this man out of my building." The humiliation was a cold, physical weight. 2 security guards, men I'd shared jokes with during their late-night rounds, now stood on either side of me, their expressions a mix of pity and professional detachment. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," the older one, Ben, whispered. "He's got the paperwork. We have to ask you to leave the premises." Julian stood by the elevators, flanked by the 2 suits from Nexus Dynamics. They looked like vultures in expensive wool coats, their eyes scanning the lobby as if they were already measuring it for new signage. One of them, a man with a sharp, angular face and a silver tie, checked his watch. "We're on a tight schedule, Julian," the silver tie man said. "We want the source code transferred to our secure servers by noon. Our legal team will handle the Sterling situation once the asset is in our possession." Julian nodded fervently, his ego visibly inflating. "Of course, Mr. Vance. It's all ready. Elias was always a bit possessive. But I'm the one who kept this ship afloat. I'm the one you want to be in business with." I was being marched toward the glass revolving doors, my heels scuffing against the marble I'd paid to have polished. My mind was a chaotic storm. How had he gotten my digital signature? I was meticulous. I used a 2-factor authentication key for everything. Then it hit me. 6 months ago, I'd been hospitalized for 3 days with a severe case of pneumonia. I'd been delirious with fever. Julian had come to the hospital, ostensibly to bring me some comforts, but he'd also brought a stack of routine administrative filings that he claimed needed my signature for the insurance providers. I'd been so out of it, so trusting. I must have signed a power of attorney or a digital authorization form hidden in the pile. He'd been planning this for half a year. As we reached the doors, Marcus stumbled forward, cutting off the security guards. He looked frantic, his eyes darting between me and the group by the elevators. "Elias, wait!" he shouted. Ben, the guard, tried to push him back, but Marcus grabbed my sleeve. He leaned in, his breath hot against my ear, and hissed a single phrase. "The versioning, Elias. Look at the versioning. He doesn't know about the ghost shadow." Before I could ask what he meant, Julian barked an order. "Get him out of here. And Marcus, get back to your desk. You work for me now or you're out on the street with him." The guards pushed me through the revolving doors. The cold morning air hit me like a slap. I stood on the sidewalk, my laptop bag over my shoulder, watching through the glass as the man who had done nothing but drink my wine and spend my money walked into the elevator with my company in his pocket. I walked to my car, my hands shaking so hard I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I drove 3 blocks away, pulled into a grocery store parking lot, and flipped open my laptop. I didn't need the office network. I'd built a redundant encrypted tunnel into the server backend years ago, a just-in-case measure for when I was traveling. Look at the versioning. I logged in using my private admin credentials. My heart hammered. Julian hadn't thought to revoke these yet. He probably didn't even know they existed. He thought the CEO account was the highest level of access. He didn't understand that I was the root. I bypassed the main GUI and went straight into the subdirectory of the core algorithm. There it was, the ghost shadow. It was a piece of code I'd written in the very early days, something I'd almost forgotten about. It was a fail-safe. Whenever the core logic of LogiLink was accessed or prepared for a bulk export, like, say, a transfer to a competitor's server, the system triggered a shadow version. To an outside observer, the code looked perfect. It was elegant, functional, and complete. But the shadow version contained a subtle mathematical decay. It was like a digital cancer. It would work perfectly for the first 48 hours, but as it processed more data, it would begin to miscalculate shipping routes by tiny, imperceptible margins. A mile here, a gallon of fuel there. Within a week, it would cause a logistical collapse so massive it would bankrupt whoever was using it. And there, on my screen, I saw the progress bar. Data export in progress. 42% complete. Destination, Nexus_Dynamics_secure_hub_B. Julian was selling them a bomb. And because he'd used my fraudulent signature to authorize the transfer, when the bomb went off, the liability wouldn't just fall on the company. It would fall on me. He was stealing the money and leaving me with the inevitable multi-billion-dollar lawsuits from Nexus and their clients. I reached for the kill command. I could wipe the servers right now. I could stop the transfer. But if I did that, I'd lose the evidence of what he was doing. I'd just be a disgruntled ex-CEO who deleted company property. I needed to let the transfer finish to prove the theft, but I needed to stop the shadow from activating before it destroyed my reputation. But then, the screen flickered. A window popped up. Remote access detected. Admin privileges revoked. My heart stopped. He'd found me. No, not Julian. Julian didn't have the technical skill to find a hidden tunnel. A message appeared on the screen typed in real time. Nice try, Elias, but I told you. I'm the driver now. I knew you'd try the back door. I've been watching your keystrokes for months. I didn't just want your company. I wanted to make sure you could never build another one. It was Marcus. The realization felt like a physical blow to the stomach. Marcus wasn't a double agent for me. He was the architect of my downfall. He'd been working with Julian from the start. He'd given me the ghost shadow tip not to help me, but to bait me into logging in so they could trace my private IP and lock me out of the entire system for good. I watched, helpless, as the export reached 100%. Transfer complete. Source deleted. The servers at Logilink headquarters began to wipe themselves. The code was gone. The backups were gone. Everything I had built now lived exclusively on the Nexus Dynamics servers, under a contract signed with my stolen name. My laptop screen went dark, replaced by a single image, a live feed from the boardroom. Julian, Marcus, and the Nexus VPs were shaking hands. Julian was holding a bottle of the $5,000 scotch I'd kept in my office for the day the Aegis deal closed. He poured a glass and looked directly into the camera, the hidden security camera I'd installed myself. "To the future," Julian toasted, his grin wide and terrifying. "And to Elias Sterling. Thanks for the hard work, buddy. We'll send you a postcard from the Cayman Islands." He leaned in closer to the camera, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Oh, and Elias? Before you think about going to the police, you might want to check your personal bank account. I think you'll find that a very large, very illegal deposit from a known shell company in Eastern Europe just landed there. In 5 minutes, an anonymous tip is going to the SEC. You aren't just a failure, Elias. You're a criminal." The feed cut to black. I sat in my car, the silence of the parking lot pressing in on me. I was a ghost. No company, no code, and a frame job that would put me in a cage for 20 years. I looked at my phone. I had one notification. It wasn't from the SEC. It wasn't from the bank. It was an encrypted message from a blocked number. "The bomb is live. But you forgot one thing, Elias. You aren't the only one who knows how to use a shadow. If you want to live, get out of the car, now." Just as I read the last word, a black SUV swerved into the parking lot, tires screaming, and pinned my car against the concrete barrier. 2 men in tactical gear jumped out, suppressed rifles leveled at my windshield. But they weren't wearing police uniforms. They were wearing the logo of Aegis Systems. The passenger door of my car was wrenched open before I could even process the tactical team's arrival. A man in a slate-gray tactical vest with the Aegis logo, a stylized shield stitched onto his chest, didn't point his rifle at me. Instead, he reached in, grabbed my laptop, and shouted, "Asset secured! Moving to the extraction point!" I was pulled from the driver's seat and shoved into the back of the armored SUV. The door slammed shut, and the vehicle roared out of the grocery store parking lot, leaving my sedan behind. Sitting in the middle row, looking perfectly calm and sipping from a thermal mug, was Mark, the lead negotiator from Aegis Systems. "Sorry about the dramatics, Elias," Mark said, his voice as smooth as it had been during our first meeting. "But when things go south with a $15 million acquisition, my board tends to authorize the high-intensity protocol. We don't like losing our investments to low-rent grifters like Julian Vane." "You knew?" I gasped, my chest heaving. "You knew what he was doing?" Mark turned a tablet toward me. On the screen was a live feed of Julian's bank accounts, his communications with Nexus Dynamics, and even a PDF of the fraudulent power of attorney form he'd tricked me into signing at the hospital. "Aegis doesn't just buy software, Elias. We buy people. And when we buy people, we vet them down to their DNA. We knew Julian was a parasite the moment we ran his background. We were waiting to see if you'd handle it or if he'd try to jump ship. When he contacted Nexus, he crossed a line into international corporate espionage. That's where we come in. He sold them the code, Mark. He wiped my servers. He framed me for money laundering. He's won." Mark chuckled, a dry, metallic sound. "He hasn't won anything. He sold Nexus a shadow version of your software. We've been watching your logs, Elias. We know about the mathematical decay you built into the failsafe. It's a brilliant piece of digital malware. In exactly 3 hours, the Nexus Dynamics logistical hub will begin to eat itself. Their trucks will stop, their inventory will vanish, and their stock price will crater." "But Julian used my signature," I argued. "When that code destroys Nexus, it's my name on the contract. I'll spend the rest of my life in a federal penitentiary." Mark leaned in closer, his eyes cold and sharp. "Not if the person who signed that contract was legally incapacitated. We have the hospital records, Elias. We have the video of Julian entering your room with those papers. And we have Marcus." "Marcus is with him," I spat. "He's the one who locked me out." "Marcus," Mark said, tapping his tablet, "is an Aegis plant. He's been on our payroll since the day we started due diligence. He didn't lock you out to help Julian. He locked you out to protect the true source code from being corrupted during the wipe. He diverted your private admin tunnel to an Aegis offshore server. Your life's work isn't gone, Elias. It's sitting in our vault." The SUV pulled into the underground garage of the Aegis headquarters, a glass and steel monolith that felt more like a fortress than an office. We were whisked into a high-security command center. On the wall-sized monitors, I saw a live feed from the Nexus Dynamics boardroom. Julian and the Nexus VPs were celebrating. They had just initiated the first live run of the stolen LogiLink software. I watched the data streams. The shadow was already beginning to weave its web. "Now," Mark said, handing me a phone, "the FBI and the SEC are already in the lobby of the Nexus building. But we need one more thing to make the charges stick. We need Julian to admit on a recorded line that he knew the signature was fraudulent and that he intentionally bypassed your authority." "How am I supposed to get him to do that?" "By doing what you do best, Elias. Being the caffeinated wreck he thinks you are. Call him, beg, Give him the performance of a lifetime. I took the phone. My hands were finally steady. I dialed Julian's personal number. It picked up on the second ring. "Elias!" Julian's voice was triumphant, booming with the arrogance of a man who thought he'd conquered the world. Calling to ask for a job, I might need a junior dev to fetch my coffee. "Julian, please," I said, my voice cracking, half acting, half genuine exhaustion. "You can't do this. The SEC just flagged my account. You're going to ruin me. Just tell the truth. Tell them I didn't sign those papers. I'll let you keep the money from Nexus. I just want my life back." Julian laughed, a jagged, ugly sound. "Your life? Your life was over the second I walked into that hospital room, you pathetic nerd. You were so easy to break. I didn't even have to try. Yeah, I forged the digital authorization. Yeah, I used your administrative access to gut the company. But who's going to believe you? I'm the CEO of LogiLink now. I'm the one the board trusts. You're just a ghost, Elias. A ghost who's going to prison for the mess I made." "So you admit it?" I whispered. "You stole the company?" "I didn't steal it," Julian sneered. "I optimized it. Now stop calling me. I have $1 billion empire to run." He hung up. In the command center, Mark gave a thumbs up to a woman sitting at a terminal. "Got it. High-fidelity recording, verified metadata. Send it to the field team." On the monitor, the doors to the Nexus boardroom burst open. It wasn't the ghost of Elias Sterling that walked in. It was a dozen federal agents in windbreakers. I watched as the color drained from Julian's face. I watched as Marcus, my traitorous lead developer, stood up, calmly removed his headset, and handed a small encrypted flash drive to the lead FBI agent. Marcus looked directly into the security camera and gave a small two-finger salute. Julian tried to bolt, but he was tackled into the very table where he'd been drinking my scotch. The Nexus VPs were shouting, their lawyers scrambling, but it was too late. The shadow had already begun its work. At that exact moment, the logistical screens in the background of the Nexus office began to flash red. The decay had hit the critical threshold. Their systems were crashing in real time. "He's done," Mark said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "And because the acquisition was built on fraud, the Nexus contract is void. However," he paused, a small smile playing on his lips, "the original Aegis offer is still on the table. In fact, since you've demonstrated such robust security features with that shadow code, the board has authorized an increase, $17 million, Elias, and we'll pay for the legal fees to clear your name of those fake deposits." 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new office. It wasn't a cramped studio apartment, and it didn't smell like burnt coffee. It smelled like the salt air of the coast. LogiLink was now a core division of Aegis Systems. Marcus was my CTO, and we were currently preparing to launch the AI module that Julian never even knew existed, the one that was now saving mid-level manufacturers millions of dollars a month. Julian and the Nexus VPs were still tied up in a series of lawsuits that would likely last a decade. Julian specifically had been sentenced to 12 years for corporate espionage and fraud. He'd tried to claim he was still a partner from his prison cell, but the napkin he'd tried to use as leverage had been shredded by the prosecution's forensic team as a worthless piece of bar trash. I looked at my desk. There was a framed photo there. It wasn't of me at a tech gala or a ribbon cutting. It was a photo of that first cramped studio apartment, the servers humming in the background. I realized then that Julian was right about one thing. He was the driver, but he'd forgotten that in the world of technology, the driver is nothing without the engine, and the engine always knows the way home. I sat down, opened my laptop, and started to code. This time, I didn't have to look over my shoulder. I was the one holding the keys. And the road ahead was finally clear.